The date is August 19, 1953. It is 3 in the morning in Tehran, Iran. A man sits alone in his pajamas in the basement of his home. He is 71 years old. He has spent his entire life in service to his country. He has just been the democratically elected prime minister of one of the oldest civilizations on Earth. Tonight, men with guns are coming for him. Not because he was a tyrant, not because he had committed any crime, not because his people wanted him gone, because he had tried to keep his own country's oil. The men who sent those soldiers were not Iranian. They were not even in the region. They were sitting in offices in London and Washington, making decisions about a nation that was not theirs to control. Decisions that would define the entire trajectory of Middle Eastern history for the next 70 years. The operation had a code name, Ajax. It was run by the CIA. And for 40 years, the United States government denied it ever happened. Until 2013, when their own internal documents were declassified and the truth was finally impossible to hide. What you are about to hear is not a conspiracy theory. It is not speculation. It is the documented, archived, officially admitted record of how wars are made, how democracies are destroyed, and how the same networks of power have been engineering global conflict for the last 80 years. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, the way you read every news headline will permanently change.
Act 1. The war machine is built. To understand how shadow networks engineer wars, you have to go back to a single year, 1947. World War II has been over for 2 years. The United States has emerged as the most powerful nation in human history. Economically dominant, militarily supreme, and sitting on the largest stockpile of nuclear weapons ever assembled. In theory, this is the moment America could have chosen a different path. The moment the most powerful country in the world could have said, "We have won the Great War against fascism, and now we choose peace." Instead, in 1947, the National Security Act is signed into law. It creates 3 new institutions that will define the next century of American foreign policy. The Department of Defense, formalizing the permanent military establishment, the National Security Council, placing war-making decisions beyond the reach of Congress, and the Central Intelligence Agency, a secret organization with a classified budget, classified operations, and accountability to no elected body. In 1947, the United States institutionalized permanent secret war. The man who signed it, President Harry Truman, later said it was the greatest mistake of his presidency. In a 1963 op-ed written 1 month after Kennedy's assassination, Truman wrote that the CIA had moved far from its original purpose, that it had become an operational and at times policy-making arm of the government, and that he was disturbed by the fact that it represented a concentration of power that was fundamentally incompatible with American democratic traditions. That op-ed ran once in a single edition of the Washington Post. It was never republished, it was never widely discussed, it was quietly buried. The machine, once built, did not want to be dismantled. Within 3 years of the CIA's creation, it had already conducted its first major covert operation, helping to fix elections in Italy to prevent a democratic socialist government from winning power. Within 3 years, it had overthrown the governments of Iran and Guatemala. Within 8 years, it was running paramilitary operations on every inhabited continent. The shadow war machine was not built to protect America. It was built to protect American corporate interests abroad, interests that had nothing to do with democracy and everything to do with resources. The evidence for this is not circumstantial. It is direct, specific, and documented in the CIA's own archived communications. In Iran, the target was a democratically elected prime minister who had nationalized the Anglo-Iranian company, today known as British Petroleum. The CIA's operation was funded in part by British intelligence, acting on behalf of oil shareholders who stood to lose billions. In Guatemala, the target was a democratically elected president named Jacobo Arbenz, who had begun land reform that threatened the holdings of the United Fruit Company, an American corporation with deep ties to the Eisenhower administration. The CIA's operation was literally planned in the offices of United Fruit's law firm. These are not allegations. The CIA has formally acknowledged both operations in declassified documents. Democracy was not being protected. It was being destroyed to protect private profit.
Act 2. The Playbook. How the machine was built. The playbook it follows becomes visible everywhere. Step 1. Identify a resource-rich country with a government that does not cooperate with American corporate interests. Step 2. Find or create an internal opposition. Fund it, train it, arm it. Give it a narrative that sounds like freedom, because freedom is the only word that makes foreign intervention acceptable to the American public. Step 3. If the opposition succeeds, install a government that will sign the contracts. If it fails, escalate. Declare the sitting government a national security threat. Begin the media campaign. Manufacture the justification. Step 4. If direct military action becomes necessary, ensure that American soldiers believe they are fighting for democracy, not for oil contracts or mineral rights or pipeline routes. Because soldiers who believe they are fighting for democracy fight harder, and they die for a story that makes the whole operation palatable to the people back home. The soldiers are real, the casualties are real, the grief is real, the justification is manufactured. Let me give you 3 specific examples from 3 different decades, each with its own officially admitted documentation. Korea, 1950. The official narrative, a defensive war against communist aggression, protecting South Korean democracy. The documented reality, the conflict was escalated in part because American strategic planners believed a permanent military presence in East Asia was necessary to contain Soviet and Chinese influence over trade routes and rare mineral deposits. Declassified NSC documents from 1950 explicitly discuss Korea in terms of strategic resource positioning, not democratic principle. Vietnam, 1964. The Gulf of Tonkin incident, the alleged North Vietnamese attack on American naval vessels that became the legal justification for full-scale war, was, by the admission of Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara in his 1995 memoir, either fabricated or wildly misrepresented. McNamara wrote that he knew at the time the evidence was uncertain. The war was escalated anyway. 58,000 Americans died. 3 million Vietnamese died, and the United States lost. Iraq, 2003. The weapons of mass destruction that justified the invasion, the weapons that Colin Powell presented to the United Nations Security Council in one of the most consequential speeches in modern diplomatic history, did not exist. Every single intelligence agency in the coalition privately acknowledged this uncertainty before the invasion. The war happened anyway. The cost? Over 4,000 American lives, hundreds of thousands of Iraqi civilian deaths, and a destabilization of the entire Middle East that continues to generate conflict today. 3 wars, 3 decades apart, 3 different stated justifications, 1 consistent pattern. The official reason was not the real reason. Act 3. Follow the money. The war profiteers. In 1961, a 5-star general and 2-term president named Dwight Eisenhower gave a farewell address to the American people that is one of the most remarkable speeches ever delivered from the White House. Eisenhower, a man who had commanded the Allied forces in Europe, who would plan D-Day, who understood military power more deeply than almost any president before or since, stood before the nation and issued a warning. He warned about what he called the military-industrial complex, a permanent alliance between the defense industry, the military establishment, and the political class, an alliance so deeply embedded in American economic life that it had developed its own agenda, its own momentum, and its own vested interest in continued conflict. A general was warning America that the war machine had become too powerful for democracy to control. Act 3. Follow the money. The War Profiteers. In 1961, a five-star general and two-term president named Dwight Eisenhower gave a farewell address to the American people that is one of the most remarkable speeches ever delivered from the White House. Eisenhower, a man who had commanded the Allied forces in Europe, who would plan D-Day, who understood military power more deeply than almost any president before or since, stood before the nation and issued a warning. He warned about what he called the military-industrial complex, a permanent alliance between the defense industry, the military establishment, and the political class, an alliance so deeply embedded in American economic life that it had developed its own agenda, its own momentum, and its own vested interest in continued conflict. A general was warning America that the war machine had become too powerful for democracy to control. Nobody listened. In the year Eisenhower gave that speech, the United States defense budget was $47 billion. By 2023, it had reached $886 billion, more than the combined defense spending of the next 10 nations on Earth. The companies that build the weapons, the aircraft, the missiles, the surveillance systems, the private military contractors, they are publicly traded corporations with shareholders who profit when conflict escalates and lose when peace breaks out. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing Defense, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics. These five companies received over $170 billion in government contracts in 2022 alone. Their stock prices rise when wars begin and fall when ceasefires are announced. This is publicly observable on any financial data platform. The executives of these companies sit on the advisory boards of think tanks that recommend military action to Congress. Their lobbyists write the defense budget requests that Congresspeople present as their own legislation. Their retired generals rotate between the Pentagon and corporate boardrooms through what critics call the revolving door, a permanent institutional connection between military command and corporate profit. Former Defense Secretary William Perry, himself a former defense industry executive, acknowledged in his memoir that the relationship between the Pentagon and defense contractors had become so intertwined that it was genuinely difficult to determine where government policy ended and corporate interest began. War is not just a political event, it is an economic system, and economic systems do not end themselves. The petrodollar mechanism adds another layer. Since 1974, the United States has operated under an arrangement with Saudi Arabia, formalized in secret agreements that were not publicly acknowledged for decades, requiring that oil be priced and traded exclusively in US dollars. This arrangement requires that the dollar remain the world's reserve currency, and the world's reserve currency status requires that the United States remain the dominant military power in the oil-producing regions. Every leader who has seriously attempted to price oil in a currency other than dollars, Saddam Hussein in 2000, Muammar Gaddafi in 2009, has been removed from power through American military action within 3 years of making the announcement. This is not a theory. The timeline is documented. The mechanism is economically rational, and the silence around it in mainstream political discourse is itself a kind of evidence.
Act 4. The Whistleblower Files. Every machine has people inside it who see what it is doing. Daniel Ellsberg was a military analyst and strategic planner who worked for the Rand Corporation and the Pentagon. He had the highest security clearances in the U.S. government. He had personally briefed presidents on nuclear war strategy. In 1971, he photocopied 7,000 pages of classified Defense Department documents and gave them to the New York Times. The documents, known as the Pentagon Papers, revealed that the Johnson and Nixon administrations had systematically lied to Congress and the American public about the scope, the objectives, and the chances of success of the Vietnam War. The Nixon administration attempted to stop publication through prior restraint, an unprecedented attempt to suppress a free press. The Supreme Court ruled against them. Ellsberg was charged with espionage, theft, and conspiracy. He faced 115 years in prison. The charges were eventually dropped, not because of any principled decision by the government, but because Nixon's operatives had burglarized Ellsberg's psychiatrist's office to find compromising information to use against him, and the judge ruled the misconduct had fatally tainted the prosecution. Frank Church was a United States Senator from Idaho who in 1975 chaired a special committee investigating the intelligence agencies, the first time Congress had ever seriously examined what the CIA, NSA, and FBI had actually been doing in secret. The Church Committee findings were staggering. Assassination plots against foreign leaders, illegal domestic surveillance of American citizens, including civil rights leaders and elected officials, programs to infiltrate and destroy political organizations the intelligence community considered undesirable, a program called COINTELPRO that had specifically targeted Martin Luther King Jr., including an anonymous letter sent to King urging him to commit suicide. Senator Church gave an interview in which he said that the intelligence apparatus had become so powerful, so technically capable, that if it were ever turned full force on the American people, there would be no place to hide and no way to fight back. He said he did not want to live in that kind of country. That interview was given in 1975. The technical capabilities available to intelligence agencies today make what Church described look primitive. Edward Snowden in 2013, John Kiriakou in 2012, Reality Winner in 2017, Thomas Drake in 2010. Each of these people saw the machine from the inside. Each of them concluded that what they saw was a fundamental betrayal of American democratic values. Each of them paid an enormous personal price for saying so. Snowden lives in permanent exile. Kiriakou served 30 months in federal prison. Winner served 4 years. Drake was prosecuted under the Espionage Act, the same law used against spies, for telling a journalist that an NSA surveillance program was wasting money while a more effective system was being deliberately suppressed. The pattern is consistent across 60 years. The machine does not tolerate those who describe what it is.